Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Phil Jimenez is an Inkpot, Diamond, and Wizard Award-winning writer and artist who has worked for DC Entertainment, Marvel Entertainment, and a host of other comic book companies for nearly 30 years. He is known for a multitude of comics, including Wonder Woman Historia, written by Kelly Sue DeConnick, who I had on the show a few weeks ago. I had the pleasure of talking to Phil about his journey as an artist and his passions. We dive into the fashion choices behind Wonder Woman Historia and his gratitude for the inspirations and mentors in his life. We also discuss the recent Don't Say Gay legislation that passed in Florida and some of the other social issues of today. I really enjoyed getting to know Phil, and I'm hopeful he will be a recurring guest on this podcast. I am so fortunate to speak with such amazing and inspiring humans. I've been enjoying these conversations and hope you have too. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Phil. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
I'm very excited to be here. And as I mentioned a little earlier, I'm actually quite honored. It's a big deal for me. So I'm happy about this. Very happy.
Oh my gosh. Well, before we get going, because I feel like you and I have a lot to talk about and we have a lot, fun things to cover. A huge shout out to our lovely Kelly Sue, because she, of course, introduced us, and we probably could spend an hour on how awesome she is for this episode if we really wanted to. But
I'm happy to come back and do that, because I don't think it can be, at least in my perspective, I don't think it can be overstated how important she has become to me these past several years, both as a creator and as a person, as a mom, as a woman, as as a peer, right? And my trajectory has changed forever because of her and because of the way she inspired me. So I'm always happy to talk about Kelly Sue DeConnick.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah. She's just, amazing. And I've had the pleasure of being able to talk to her a few times and, got to know Matt very well. And just this is one of the beautiful things about podcasting is you get to just pick who you want to talk to, which are all the people you think are cool and absolutely adore their work. So I'm having the time of my life. This is just a passion project.
I love that. That's so good.
It's just fantastic. And so jumping right in, obviously you have a wide range of work that is just acclaimed and amazing. But I have to tell you, when I look at Historia, my mind is just totally blown. I think I told Kelly Sue on the podcast that we did about Historia, I want every version. I want the print. I want the big, huge, extra large version. I have the digital. So I started digital because I'm zooming in, zooming out. And, but I want it in every medium. I want it in every capacity because it's just so gorgeous. It's overwhelming, actually.
I'm really happy to hear that. It was, and I say this, and I've said this on multiple podcasts and interviews, and it's genuinely true. My goal with that work was to elevate my drawing to match what I believe is the quality of Kelly Sue's script. I had not been inspired to draw in such a way for 20 years. And my conversations with Kelly Sue and the script that she provided, I would gasp aloud. I would be shocked. She would tell me plot ideas that she had, ways of sort of re-envisioning the mythology of Wonder Woman. And my belief was, if I was going to have to raise the bar on my work to such a degree to sort of match the bar that she had set. Simply saying that I do not want to take away from the work that I did. I worked really hard. And it was important for me also. Again, I've been around for a really long time. I've kind of known for my George Perez influences. I wanted to evolve as an artist. This was an opportunity to do that. And I wanted a certain amount of respect from several of my peers. Kelly Sue talked a lot about making art for yourself. And I would say I make my art for myself for about 10 people. There are about 10 people in my head that if they think this stuff is good, then I did okay. They're the ones I'm making it for. And so I got the response that I'd hoped for, and that I finally felt like I joined the club. as it were.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm sure a lot of people would beg to differ that has been from a long time ago that you've joined the club. But yeah, it was just incredible. And I loved the story that she shared with me, how you would send like various versions of outfits and shoes for, like one, thing. And I'm just going, wow, that just shows the level of detail and commitment that Phil has towards this project. But I mean, that was pretty extra though, no?
I think it was extra. It was about getting it right. We've talked a lot about how you can't make perfect art, right? Like that's impossible. And it wasn't even the goal, but I wanted to make sure that things were right, that they were correct. Like Kelly Sue had a very specific idea of who and what Hera was. And I wanted to match that idea because I believed her interpretation was so worthy. And I thought without the sort of artistic support, that interpretation, not that it would fail, it just wouldn't land in the same way. Beyond that, quite frankly, it's just that kind of design is fun. Like that our conceit was that Hera would never be caught dead in the same thing twice, right? And so she wears a different gown in every scene she's in. And part of that was just indulgence. Like I just wanted to draw, wanted to be ridiculous about it. And as I've mentioned before, so much of that is just stolen from fashion. That was a way that Kelly Sue and I really connected. Was our thoughts on the gods were that these are interpretations of these beings that we really can't conceptualize. They're not real. We didn't want to just put them in togas. And so our love of fashion, particularly avant-garde fashion, really sort of filtered in. And it is funny because the nods to say Alexander McQueen are so obvious. So if you know fashion, like, oh, I know where I got that.
Yes.
I know where I got that, right? Like totally saw that. Maybe a little too much, but it's ode to a way of thinking, particularly I would argue about, and I could be wrong about this, but about female characters who have been interpreted a single way for so long. And this particular group of those characters. And it was just really fun to have permission to play.
Yeah, no, I totally saw that. It was like, Greek God Fashion Week going down every single page. And I was like, yes, more, please. And so it was fabulous and absolutely amazing. And I think, though, there's something to be said for that. What you kind of just said was like, there is this stereotype of what we always think. And it's something that, of course, Kelly Sue quoted was like, we want to change that version, that idea of history that we've always been fed. But then there's kind of that, well, okay, I'm Hera, so let me be Hera. It's like taking it to the next degree.
Kelly Sue's take on Hera was more is always more. Because I would worry. So one of the outfits that I never got to do I wanted to put her in a sheer top, which sounds really fun. I was watching Madonna's Vogue video from 30 years ago, and there was the thing where she's in the sheer top, and it's like, oh, I wonder if Hera would wear that. And I asked Kelly Sue, and she goes, Hera would wear whatever the fuck she wants, which made me laugh hysterically. And she's like, why wouldn't she wear it? And it was so, God, I mean, those permissions were very important to me. Like there was very little that I would proceed on without talking to her about it. And what was lovely about that was I have not had a working relationship in all my years like I've had with Kelly Sue, where there was constant communication and texting, sharing of imagery, ideas back and forth. And I would say 98% of the time we were on it. Like there was very little divergence. And if she did diverge, it was very important for me to listen to that and learn from that, because one of the things that excited me about working for her, clearly this is becoming the Kelly Sue show, is that I wanted to learn this long into this business to work with a co-creator that can teach me and enlighten me and make me think about the medium, character depiction, all this in new ways is the most exciting thing in the world. And I had gotten to a point where I thought I'd worked on a book called Superwoman, which I mentioned in other interviews. It was just a really unpleasant experience, and which was a real bummer. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm just done. Like I've had my time. It's great. This isn't for me anymore. And the thing that was really extraordinary about this relationship with Kelly is that she made me think, oh, maybe I do have more to say, but also like I got to learn and absorb and like think. Like one of the things I talk about all the time is she thinks in rhythms, and so it made me really reconsider how I heard dialogue. And the couple of places that we disagreed, it had to do with like the beats that she was trying to hit, and I'm like, oh, and it was always a revelation, and it was always. Just an extraordinary thing to learn, even this late in the game.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that just kind of shows also in terms of like the type of artist you are, because I think that, you know, I'm a martial artist and you're always learning. Like that's what you just kind of are like, yeah, well, even if you've achieved this level or this level, it's like if you're a student first and if you always remember that, then the experience is just so much more fulfilling and enriching. And just like you said, to surround yourself with these type of peers that just kind of elevate you is really what it's about, you know. And of course, Wonder Woman in general is very dear to your heart. So this must have been just kind of like coming full circle, but also just like nostalgic as well, right? Like just a different approach to it, but obviously, you know, with your biggest influences. And I mean, you say such beautiful things on your social, of course, about George Perez and how like, you know, everything is an homage and a tribute. And I love that because again, that traditional martial artist side of me is that, you know, that which you feel is your teacher, the person that you're honoring all the time, like you always are rooted in that. And I feel like you're so rooted in that. And yeah, so of course, Wonder Woman, it's just, like I said, full circle. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've said before, and I will say it like, into comics, and I George Perez was clearly my big influence and like a profound influence. You see it in the drawing and design. And even as my drawing has changed, my sense of design is absolutely rooted in his, which is in many ways rooted in his, you know, influence as well, like Rich Buckler and oh my gosh, I can't remember the other artist offhand. And as a quick tangent, so one of the things I'm really interested in our business, but in general, are these sort of artistic family trees, right? So George was a real influence, but who are his influences? And so I've been starting to go back up the tree a little bit. Anyway, that said, like I never hit it, partially because I was very excited by the notion of perpetuating a tradition, like an artistic tradition that I felt very few were, right? Like, and it was an important tradition to me. It was a way of thinking about story and design and character. It had such impact on me as a child, as an adult still. And I wanted to be a part of that. The funny thing is I never asked George, like, if he wanted that. Like, I just took on the mantle and I did it. And he's always been incredibly appreciative. And I'm very grateful for that. Because only in recent months have I come to realize, oh, like it's not like I was an official mentee, right? Where I was working in a studio and I came up behind him. I just kind of assumed this thing. And in hindsight, I mean, I think he was always honored by that. I hope he was, or he knew that it was, my goal was not in any way to sort of replace him or subsume him. It was to continue this way of working that he invented that meant so much to me. And I did hear that he was able to see some of Historia and he was kind of blown away by it because it was so different than anything I'd done before. And he was always very invested in me finding my own way of working and sort of leaving that influence behind. And the funny thing is I was just like, but I think that influence is partially why I do what I do today. So it's an interesting battle I find, right? About letting go, like not forgetting, but growing, which as you know, right? Like, that's what teacher student, you always want evolution and growth. And at the same time, I guess it's that battle between evolution and growth and sort of remembering where you came from.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting how there's so many parallels, and I don't think I drew it as heavily until really talking to you in this kind of light, and I love that because one of the things as martial artists we're like, well, all the things you've learned isn't about like the actual physical part, right? It's what you take with you out into the world,
Yes.
and those principles and everything, and I love kind of imagining the young Phil being impressioned by comics, and I mean, can you give me a little window to like what that was like the first comic you picked up, and then also, what it was like for you. You grew up in California?
Yeah. Wow, look at you. Read my Wikipedia page. So long story short, I was born and raised in Southern California, Santa Monica and Long Beach primarily. I've told the story a lot, but I was not a comic book kid. I was a cartoon and TV kid. I was obsessed with TV shows, and I would watch anything, and I still to this day will watch almost anything. Excuse me. And that would range from like, so when I was a child, I would just watch cartoons, incessantly watch cartoons. And then as I got older, live action adventure shows. I did find that the thing that appealed to me the most as a child was adventure, superheroes. But the heroes that appealed to me the most were Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman. And so I've talked at length before about like trying to analyze why that is. Wonder Woman, Linda Carter's Wonder Woman sort of changed my life. I've had the good fortune to be able to tell her that. Her embodiment of that character and the portrayal of that character just hit at that right time in that right way, where it literally spun. It was sort of fate and destiny. And those are heavy words, right? But I think back on 45 years of my life sort of shaped by this character and formed by that initial iteration. So anyway, I was a TV kid. I was very into cartoons, very into action adventure. My very first comic book was a Wonder Woman comic. Here's where we nerd out for a moment. I believe it was Wonder Woman 226, where the Earth 1 and Earth 2 Wonder Woman meet each other, and they fight like a evil Nazi, as they will. And so my first introduction into comics when I was 6 was an introduction to parallel worlds and multiple Earths. And so that conception, that idea, it's amazing. In hindsight, it's really funny to me, was never difficult. The idea that there were parallel Earths and multiple versions of characters is like, oh, that's amazing, right? And so, but what started me reading comics was actually not superheroes, it was Star Wars. So I was a Star Wars kid. I was obsessed with Star Wars. Anything Star Wars, that's all I wanted when I was a child. And the Marvel comic bridged those gaps between the movies. So that's where I learned the vocabulary of comic reading. That's how I became a comic book fan, was through this licensed property, Marvel, because I recognized those characters, but I also learned how to read comics through that comic. And I've told this story many times, but I think it's really important. There's an issue, it's Star Wars number 53, and I think about it all the time. I believe it was David Michelinie wrote it and Walter Simonson drew it. And Walter Simonson became an early mentor and friend of mine, a very dear man. And I told him, and I always get teary telling the story because he doesn't remember it. He just remembers how it was working with Lucasfilm. But that story literally affected the way I saw war and combat, because it's basically about the rebellion having to blow up another space station of the Empire. But the end, everyone's cheering, and C-3PO turns to Princess Leia, and he's essentially like asking why she's not cheering, and she's ruminating on all the death that just happened, and that there were probably people on the Death Star that they were just doing their jobs, and that not everyone was evil. Some were drafted, but like what we're celebrating is the death of all these people. And it was a very, the melancholy hit of that literally affected the way I see war and combat. That's almost never changed. And what it spoke to me about, and the reason I clearly get teary, aside from its sentiment, which I think is very important, is the incredible power of so-called junk mediums, right? Disposable entertainment. If it lands in the right time with good intent, it can really change our perceptions of the world that we live in. So with Star Wars, that made me a fan of comics, and that issue that made me think they had power, and like that they had power to change the way we think. And I'm not sure I thought that at 10, but I do remember, like, in hindsight, that was one that really hit me. And then ultimately I became a superhero fan in high school. I was a kid that could always draw. Friends saw that I could draw and introduced me like the X-Men and the Teen Titans. And then I started copying from them. And that's how I learned how to draw comics. And then, of course, I encountered George Perez's New Teen Titans, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. Going backwards a little bit. One, Linda Carter, I'm with you right there. I had the whole outfit. I had the bands. I had the rope, the lasso. I had the boots. And I mean, I would be like completely in awe if I had the opportunity to, like tell her what that meant as well, as somebody who just saw like this strong woman who was doing good and just like having feeling of some sort of representation. And And you talk about these impressions that you had at such a young age, and of course, looking back and knowing what that kind of meant. And clearly you've had the, I won't say unusual, but the honor of definitely meeting a lot of the people that have made really big impacts on you in your life. And, I'd like to take a moment to kind of like delve into that a little bit, because we don't all get to meet our quote unquote superheroes, or those people that have kind of made that impact, and then also get to learn from them. Right. And so, in what way do you feel like that's really maybe changed who you have become? Or do you feel like it's just that you right place, right time, or because you were clearly on the path of like doing the work you're doing, but like to have met the people that have really kind of made such an impact on you must be kind of amazing.
So it's again, another good fortune when I was talking to you earlier and you're like, how are you? And I really got to thinking that so much of like my personal angst, and this is a luxury, is first world. There's not a thing that is wrong with my life when I look on it, because I've been able to do all these things. I'm reminded constantly that I've lived my dream job. I would say that there's 7 billion people on the planet, and 6.5 of them have stories that are far more interesting than mine and more compelling. I just happen to have the skill set, and I happen to be in the right place to tell my stories. And so to me, that's like an unparalleled gift, right? And so to be in a business for 30 years and say like 25 of them have been amazing is ridiculous. It's a gift I think very few people get. And so when I get really sour or lost in my dark thoughts, I'm reminded by quick glance at my photograph, for example, of Linda Carter, that my life has been really blessed. And and there's intention there. I don't mean to say it just all sort of fell on me, right? So when I met Linda Carter, what was really wonderful about it is, it's a long story. The short version is she was shooting the DVD extras that I happened to be on for the first Wonder Woman DVD volume set. And she was at DC Comics. The president of DC Comics, Paul Levitz, allowed me to meet her. I had just finished a book that was an homage to her. It was on my Wonder Woman run. And she was incredibly gracious and sweet. She was everything you would hope for when you would meet. And I feel like, gosh, I feel like I'm talking to celebrities. So you would get this, but like when you meet a famous person and they're lovely, right? And you're like, oh my God, this is perfect. And it was a 10-minute conversation. Very humorously, I walked into her while she was like putting her clothes on. She's like, do you mind? Like, she's basically putting her bra on or whatever, and or adjusting to get ready for this photo shoot. She's like, can you give me a minute? I'm like, absolutely. We have this really lovely exchange. I cry, she cries. She's like, we need a picture. This was before cell phones, or I didn't have my cell phone. So I ran down to like a local, like a bodega, and bought a disposal camera, took pictures. She taught me always take 2, 1 for safety, which I still do all the time. But it was one of those fantastic things where I was able to express to her what she meant. And she took it and she received it. And it felt like she got it. And and I was able to leave, right? And it was that perfect thing and I've since seen her at different functions. I've had dinner with her, and she's hilarious. I actually really like her very much. But I was just like, this can sound very strange. It was like, I didn't need to be her best friend. I just wanted her to know what she meant to me. So it was just this tiny little moment of time, and it was a perfect sliver. After 9/11, and so I've said before and I talk about it a lot when I teach, that I had the great gift of having really good mentors and teachers, particularly in late high school and college. And so I'm a big, big believer in their power. And it's one of the reasons I like to teach. And some of them were very hard on me, thank God. One of my favorites, his name is Jack Endewelt, and he's the head of my department at school. And he was at college, and he was going to fail me in my principles of illustration class because I just was not listening, because I thought I knew everything. And he's like, you're great, but you are a terrible student, and I'm going to fail you unless you do these things. And it was so shocking because my whole life had sort of been rewarded for this skill. And then when I got to the real world, I realized I wasn't as skilled as maybe in my high school, I had this set of skills, but in the real world, I was just another young buck artist. But he knew how passionate I was, and he knew how sort of determined I was. And when I refined my portfolio, for example, he took me to DC Comics and he introduced me to Joe Orlando, who gave me my first job. Blah, blah, blah. Long story. But the point being, mentors are enormously important. Influence is important to me. So after 9/11, I decided I was going to reach out to various people who I believed had impact on my creative life. Some of them whom were kooks, some of whom were wonderful. My favorite was Stan Winston, who has passed away, but he was the guy that created the animatronic dinosaurs for Jurassic Park and the Terminator machine. And we had some hilarious exchanges. He was very sweet and very funny. And we ended on like just a very funny note. And I just thought I got to tell Stan Winston what he meant to me, right? Like, that's really cool. I just on Instagram posted this thing about Land of the Lost, which I was obsessed with as a kid. And Sid Croft, one of the creators, thanked me in a private message. I was just like, thank you. Your show had an enormous impact on me, and I have a great life because of you. So maybe it's because I'm old, but I've been doing this for a long time. I truly believe in reaching out to the people that meant something, especially creatively, and just saying thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, gratitude is definitely one of those things we need to hold on to. 10-year-olds now that are embracing Star Wars and superheroes and comics have a very different life than 10-year-olds back when maybe we were closer to 10-year-olds and enjoyed things like Star Wars and Superman and comics. And so as a 10-year-old going, oh, Wonder Woman is my character, and, Star Wars number 53. And did you ever have any of those like instances where people made fun of you, or did you have your community already kind of growing up?
I was teased a lot for being gay. I sort of, and when I say a lot, that's not actually entirely accurate. I had a couple bullies,
okay.
But I also had wonderful defenders. I was in the rare situation, I think, of having, like, there was a kid who bullied me in 10th grade, and I had a wonderful defender in one of my teachers who sort of confronted him quite publicly about it. And so I always, unlike many people, I always felt affirmed and sort of strengthened. Like, I knew that if my back was to a wall, there were people that would protect me. That said, being a kid that can draw, I think shielded me from a lot. I wasn't a super weirdo. I was clearly like kind of like probably a femmy, chubby kid, but it was, I think, because I could draw and I could draw my friends and I turned my friends into comic book characters and whatever, I was considered one of the special ones. And I was also really
yeah, you had a superpower.
Yeah, I had a superpower. And so I was super, I was also really good academically. So I did not experience, I think, a lot of what other people do, that sort of sense of I'm alone, I'm
Yeah.
different, like that sort of repressive elements of childhood, and in the way I think others did. I'm not saying that I didn't have it, but I think having this skill set allowed me to get through, right? So I was cool even among people that I might not have been cool with otherwise. Oh, he's a kid that can draw. He's a kid that can draw.
Right.
So,
when you mentioned that, I was like, oh man, I would yell like, hey, can you draw me this?
Yeah, right?
I can imagine that you would be that kid that like maybe they would have made fun of you, but they kind of needed your skill. So
I think it's a lot about, you hear comedians talk about like making people laugh as sort of a deflective mechanism, right? Like it's a way to, and I think it's not dissimilar. And I think a lot about this rearing children, and this is a terrible thing to say, and forgive me if you're listening. I think having something special, like I think I would be very concerned if my kid was absolutely ordinary, not because I think there's anything wrong with that, but I know for me, having this skill got me through tough times, right? Like it was a shining light. It was something I could do. It directed my life. And so I think about if I didn't have that, like where would I have settled? What would I have done? How would I have gotten out of some of those situations? So I think about this a lot, and about nurturing skills without, and I was, again, really lucky. My mother was she was actually a very good artist, but her parents did not nurture that skill in her. And so I think she chose to nurture it in me and allow me without any sort of pressure. And I'm grateful for that, because I think it allowed me to navigate tough spaces when I was younger a lot easier than I would have otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard enough, I think, being 10 as it were, and especially now. And so one of the things I did want to talk to you about, because it's so in my face, and just, we're in Florida. Apologies to everybody. I'm in Florida. I constantly have to apologize for Florida on this podcast, but, as an advocate for LGBTQ plus community and just being vocal about a lot of the issues, obviously there's some really heinous legislation that's being passed here. Like we coined by Representative Guillermo, the, Don't Say Gay bill.
Right.
And I feel like we're really going backward in time. And I, as part of Make Us Visible Florida, I've been working with a lot of students who are in my coalition who have been advocating for our bills for API history inclusion. And they've shared some heart-wrenching stories of what's been happening to them in their community because they are gay or queer. And I just thought we were a little bit, I thought we had progressed a bit, and I felt like we're taking steps backward. And just curious how, that plays out for you as an adult, right? Kind of, does that bring back memories, or what can also we as allies do more of to help with these issues? Because I felt like, oh, we were finally moving forward. And then you realize, actually, now we're going backwards. And I feel like many BIPOC community members feel this way. Many people,
I think many people
that have a lot of issues. Yeah.
So much to that question. And there's so many layers, because I was just thinking about, because I was reading about your advocacy recently, and I was sort of going to throw it back at you in similar questions. So a couple things that strike me there's so much to this. One thing that really fascinates me currently is this sort of anti-gay legislation that's coming around. Feels less about gayness, right? Less about sexual identity. This is about gender identity. And so one of the really fascinating things to me about this pushback, say in places like Florida, is what's driving it, for example, is I would argue anti-transness, right? I feel like there are enough people who are like, gay people are fine, whatever. And I don't mean I don't mean it's like a bed of roses, but I feel like we made that hurdle about sexual orientation. There are enough people who are like, oh, he's gay, she's a lesbian, whatever, who are okay with that. I think what people struggle with now is gender representation and how people represent. And that was really fascinating to me, because I think it's generally accepted that the sort of root of homophobia remains misogyny, right? And so, because it is the idea of boys behaving like girls is so heinous to people, and in some ways girls behaving like boys, but I think that's still a little more acceptable. And I mean, a little, not a ton.
Right. Yeah.
But like I love that I'm talking, forgive me. I mean, it's so clear I'm talking to you and you did a whole movie about this, right? About gender and war and things like that, which is all Wonder Woman is about for, as well. But I remain really interested in and feel the struggle right now is grappling with issues of gender and sex representation as opposed to sexual orientation, which again, I don't want to say is a bed of roses, but seems much more acceptable. The other thing, and I cannot stress this enough, and is that in talking about LGBTQ people, we're still talking, I feel like, there's still heavy divisions between essentially white gay men and everyone else, which is true in most discussions about representation. And the need for our community, and I say our community in the broadest possible sense, for a new sort of leadership, a new sort of visibility. I feel like gay to be I'm not even talking about straight allies. I'm thinking like, if you care about us as a people, and by me, what I'm saying is if you're a gay person and you care about other gay and LGBTQ people, then you have to make the choice to make sure that you are defending all of us. And I still am not sure that is entirely, I don't know how often that happens, right? I'm not sure how much that advocacy happens from within our own community as well.
Interesting.
And particularly, I think the divide, and trust me, like I know there are a lot of extraordinary sort of white gay men who are advocating, but I know others who are like off, they have money, they are fine, they're secure. The Don't Say Gay law isn't really going to affect them. Like it might, but conceptually it's like less important to them. And for me, like the advocacy that I'm looking for is from them, right? Like fight for your brothers and sisters who don't look like you, who don't have your luxury. So that's my big take.
Yeah, that's actually super fascinating because there's so many parallels there to the immigrant community and how a lot of immigrants who are here are not supportive of new immigrants to come into this country. And I'm just like, wait, what? And so it's kind of fascinating that you kind of share that. And I think as a member of the community, you kind of have that, I don't want to say right, but you have that perspective to be able to kind of call people out in that sense. And in the same way that I have tried to reason with others that, well, I'm already here. And so, good luck to everybody else. I think we should close the borders, and I'm going, wait, you had your opportunity and now you're not supportive of, others. And I think that there's something to be said for that, and where it becomes, it's not necessarily a community, but it's like just down to selfish individuals.
Yeah. So,
and
I'm totally interrupting. I apologize. Please continue.
No, that was it.
Oh, no. So two things about that. One of which is just an anecdote. So my father's, I think it was his aunt, a couple of years ago, I was sitting with her for dinner, and it was a big family thing, and we were talking about immigration, and like Mexican woman, and she's just like, well, they need to, she was so anti-immigrant, it was insane. And she's like, they need to make sure they don't come across from the border. Meanwhile, my grandmother, I think I can say this, totally came over illegally the first time she came over, not because I think she was trying to skirt things, but because she didn't know better. And she went back, she ultimately immigrated legally, that's fine, with my father and my uncle. But it was just amazing to hear this woman talk so heavily about anti-immigration, say, well, we were already here and we did it the right way, and da-da-da. And I was just like, I mean, I listened. I'm like, I'm not even going to listen. I'm not going to even argue with you. But like, wow, that's really fascinating. That is your perspective.
It's jaw dropping. It is. And it's actually, and we can kind of, not that we're laughing about it, but you can kind of kind of tell the story. But then it's actually just sad, and it like makes you feel bad for humanity. like you and I were talking, like, oh, we'll take the individual wins that we can get, because it's just such a kind of dark, if we start to really think about it, the world at large is, my very good friend and Greg Rucka and I will go down this tunnel, and we go deep, like Greg and I go, we go dark. We call it, we go dark. And so often on this podcast, and as you know, he's very vocal.
Yes,
so.
yes. The thing that so sorry. The other thing I wanted to mention, only because I was talking with my writing group, our writers group, and we were talking about this last night. We were talking about the notion of American individualism and the sort of that fight in terms of policy and public space, et cetera, health policy, about right of the individual versus right of the community, and a fairly deep dive into what sort of individualism has gotten us, right, or not. And what you're talking about is everyone kind of now, like, that sort of, I'm going to say, with a very sort of surfacey understanding that approach, that American idea of like, it's all about you and you get yours. That kind of individual, like rugged individualist approach, I have really struggled with in recent years because it really does strip any sense of responsibility from community, and from each other, right? From anyone beyond like whoever's in your front yard. And that is, I just think with a population as large as ours, that's impossibly to think, right? You cannot think. And it's not a way I'm interested in navigating the world, right? Like, especially as I get older, like I walk through the world in the body of a white guy. So I get, so there's probably a million things I'm not even thinking about, like probably a million things that I get away with that I wouldn't otherwise. But I never want to, as I get older, I'm just not interested in living a world where all we're doing is thinking about ourselves, right? Like, I'm so interested now in communities and sense of community. I'm so interested in the LGBT, like the thing I really love about LGBTQ community is that it is the broadest coalition of people, because it draws from literally every sort of racial, ethnic, economic, demographic, every country, 180 languages, right? Like, so what I see, the thing I love about being part of that community, sort of sociopolitically, but personally, is the possibility of these voices. It is, the possibility of representation within it is just unrivaled, I think, by other sort of marginalized groups. And the other thing that's really interesting, so I tend to use the word, Kelly Sue and I've talked about this a lot, queer in a really broad sense. So a lot of people, they use it in terms that is exclusively about sexual orientation. And for me, queering is like a way of seeing the world. I tend to use the word to describe like anti-patriarchy, anti-tradition, anti-capitalism, right? Like, it's a way of seeing things askew, different than the norm, different than the mainstream. And for me, that sort of, that queerness, if for example, you're a gay person and rejecting the queerness that comes with, I don't feel like you're doing anyone any good, right? And I mean that like it's so simple. Like, if you're not helping reshape the world, even in your little pocket, right? If you've mainstreamed yourself and you've got your money in your apartment, whatever, but you're not doing anything to like just sort of tilt the world queer a little bit for someone else. If you're not putting material or art out there that skews the world and makes people think about it in a different way, if you're just not even using language, right? Like in a way that sort of spins things for people and pushes back or makes people reevaluate, I would say, like, what's the point? So what excites me about being part of that queer community, and again, that sort of its broadest, like this giant coalition, is all these different perspectives that could literally change the world if I guess if we could find détente among us, right, to do so.
Yeah, that is so well said. And I love that I've gotten a chance to really hear a lot about like your thought process and your philosophies, and especially because, you know, kind of coming back to your work, I read that you bring your own life experiences into your work a lot. And I would love to hear how that's really evolved over time. Like, obviously, if you're doing a superhero thing, you're kind of under the DC Marvel, you know, like
Right.
you must, you know, kind of stay within sort of this. But I happen to know a lot of creators that I've gotten to talk to here that definitely put their own spin on things that have had some messaging. And I know people get upset about that, but at the same time, I mean, it's your work, right? And so I'd love for you to expand a little about the life experiences that you do put into your work, and, you know, even if it's throughout a timeline or even just now or moving forward, or yeah.
So there are two things that hit me. One is a DC Comics thing, and the other is the gig that I'm working on now, which is probably the most personal thing I've worked on. So I remember on my run in Wonder Woman 20 years ago. So a lot of my personal philosophy, which was actually shaped by my understanding of Wonder Woman's philosophy, which was ultimately shaped by George Perez and those creators, right? Like, it's this weird circle. As a quick tangent, I often say, like, I'm really fascinated by those books that were covered by the Comics Code Authority when I was younger, because there was this list of rules, like characters had to behave a certain way, law and criminality had to be seen a certain way. And I think about like the impact that those books had on me and my sense of good and justice. And I'm like, those were actually shaped by these rules that were written in the 1950s to mainstream and narrow a way of thinking among children. And yet I really think, and I could be wrong, that my perception of what is just and what is good, which I don't think is bad, was shaped in many ways by these rules, right? So I'm always in conflict with that. But anyway, so my Wonder Woman run, there were these moments. There are two things that I talk about. The way I believe that character navigated the world and what I believed she believed about the world is absolutely infused in that book. And it was that human beings can coexist peacefully if they're given the proper tools to do so. Doesn't mean you're going to like each other, but you don't have to kill each other. And so that way of thinking and seeing the world like infused that run as much as I could, considering crossovers and editorial interference, etc. I remember when DC Comics was going to blow up Paradise Island and I got to reinvent it. And it was really fascinating because I just been to Italy for the first time, and it was in Rome. And I was at an ancient university in Rome. And I was just, so I'm a teacher. I tended to think of Wonder Woman as a teacher back then. And I was like, what if we reinvented Paradise Island as a university and that anyone can come, right? Like it is, and it became a university for cultural exchange. And the new Themyscira was absolutely me, right? It's sort of like, it was a place where men and women could coexist. No weapons worked except for on their little weapon island, right? So where anyone could come, anyone could attend. And of course there was magic that allowed that for space. And stripped of need, so stripped of capitalist drive, it's a little Star Trek-y. All people had to do was come and learn and exchange, right? And that is absolutely me. And the sort of way I'm interested in navigating the world and what excites me the most, like exchange of ideas. I thought it was hilarious because bringing up Poor Greg Record, like they blew that up like 6 months after I left the book. Like that sort of new, and it was replaced by sort of an older version of Paradise Island, the kind of more Bronze Age warrior version. But that absolutely infused my personal life and viewpoint. Absolutely infused that run. In recent months, I've been hired to do a series of new comics for a company called Zest World, and the 5 series, particularly the first and the second, are absolutely personal. The first one's about a messy single mother trying to keep custody of her son. And then she gets embroiled in this mystery, and it's sort of like navigating this stuff. And it's so much based on my mother and my relationship with my mother. And it's super personal that way. She's messier in a different way than my mother. But there's a story that I tell about in the second chapter where these cops have showed up at the door because she's getting a restraining order on her boyfriend. And I remember coming home from Disneyland when I was like 12, and there were all these cops outside of my house. And because my mother was dated terrible men, and she called the cops on him, and like all the neighbors were out, they saw this story. And I'm just coming back from Disneyland, and like she's in tears, and the cops are like taking him away, and there's a restraining order being put on him. I'm like, wow. And that, of course, is a sort of fundamental memory. So that's sort of infused. I'm taking sort of stuff like that and infusing it. So it becomes very personal. And then there's another, the second story after that is, I call it kind of a queer Mexican, The Hours. It's sort of 3 time periods. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
3 love stories, 3 time periods, all kind of linked together thematically. But one of them is a familial love story. It's about 2 sisters, and they're just can't stand each other. And I find that one of the things that drives me creatively is that most family members on both sides of my family do not like each other. So I'm very interested in notions of family of choice. And also, I'm quite saddened by the fact that the 2 sisters that I'm basing this on, I think, are 2 of the smartest people in my family, and I love them both, and they can't stand each other. And I'm thinking, in a world that is this hard, in a world that is so stacked against you, you're women of color, you're women, to not find natural allyship in that, or to not and like the families are divided over, like, because their parents, now fight over. It's also messy. I'm thinking, and their issues are ultimately over class. Like it's over sort of money and who has it and who doesn't, and whiteness and like proximity to whiteness and all this sort of stuff. I'm just thinking, you could lead our families, right? You could represent us if you could get over this. And instead, there's this friction that I just don't think will go away until your children make it go away. And so all of that is in this next project. So I think because I'm older, and that's the stuff that interests me more than cosmic wars and infinity gems, right? Like, which I love. Don't get me wrong. I'm still a nerd, but that sort of interpersonal stuff is what's infusing my work in the future.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Well, sign me up. I'm ready to read and digest all of that. I was like, yes, you sold me on the Mexican Hours. I was like, oh yes. Who will be Nicole Kidman's character, and who will be? Yeah, I'm right there with you. So I'm very excited. And I really
it works well so far. So I'm excited about it.
Oh my gosh, I'm super excited. And whatever you give me, I will link here so people can stay tuned and everything. But I loved what you said about family of choice, or family by choice, because that is something that really resonates with me as well. Being raised, obviously, my father is very traditional Chinese, even though my mom's she's Chinese, but she's Jamaican. So it's it's still all very close-knit family relationship, right? And so blood is thicker than water. Right. I had to hear that shit so much growing up, and I get it. But then as I've gotten older, I just have really veered from that principle, because I just feel like, people who love you will show you they love you and not just be entitled to it because you happen to be related to them. And it goes very much against kind of what is traditional, right, in my culture.
Of course.
And yeah, so that's fascinating to me, that whole dynamic.
So forgive my ignorance. So your mom was she born in Jamaica?
She's born and raised in Jamaica. 90% of the family that I interact with are from Jamaica.
Oh,
and
shit.
So as a young child, that was very much that's what I cook pretty much 6 out of 7 days a week is Jamaican food.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. All the Chinese, as much as I look very Chinese, obviously, it's just because of my father's school and the martial arts background and everything, but I don't actually know that side of the family because, most of them were in China or was very, very distant. So I'm really more connected, and like growing up with my cousins is really from my mom's side, and none of them speak Chinese. I mean, my husband, who is Dominican, speaks more Chinese than any of my Chinese Jamaican family. They are Jamaican. They look Chinese, but don't let them fool you. They will. Yeah.
Amazing to me. The thing that I don't know why, and again, all sorts of, because I think what surprises me about it was when I was reading about it, I'm like, oh, she's from Boston. So I was not expecting the Jamaican connection, right? I'm like, oh shit, that's amazing.
Born in Boston.
Right. So randomly, have you ever been to Provincetown?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really hang there. My family is from Kingston. Don't recommend anybody go on vacation there or anything, but yeah.
The only reason I ask, it's just this lame attempt to relate, is there's like this small but tightly knit community of Jamaican folks that have been there from the 70s. And it's just sort of like kind of divine and unexpected. Right, because I mean, I love Provincetown. It's Whitey Whitersonville.
Yeah,
but I
haven't gotten to go. My cousin goes a lot, and I get to hear about it.
It is a favorite place of mine, partially because it's there is a fantastic art community there, which I love, and I have a lot of fun there. But again, I'm sorry, it's a super lame attempt at connecting, but the Jamaican population has a presence there, like they're well known, and I'm fascinated. Yeah.
Yes, and you'll find that like pockets of, and you'll specifically find pockets of Chinese Jamaicans.
So interesting. Very
specifically, yeah, it's like especially in Miami and Toronto and like the places where they all mostly immigrated to. But but our old roots and stuff in Jamaica is mostly the Kingston area, and most of everyone has moved now because. Poverty, crime.
Of course.
But I can see how like throughout the US, there's so many different pockets of like culture that you'll just kind of find, and very random, but very even more specific, like that Chinese Jamaican community is very well knit. So, yeah.
This is a total bizarre segue, if you don't mind, because I'm just curious. And of course, now it escapes me because you just mentioned Toronto. And what's the new Pixar movie that just came out? It's Red.
Oh, Turning Red.
Turning Red. Did you see that movie?
Yeah. I happened to see it. Yeah, it's so funny because I normally am not very quick on the uptake. My friend's like, you have to see it because I felt like I was seen in that film. I was like, okay. And I had some time on the weekend and I was going to see my nephew who's always up on Disney. And when I told him we watched it, he's like, it's already been out a week. You just saw it. I was like, you're lucky. Usually it takes me like a year. So yes, but I happened to see it. So that's what's really funny. Normally I'd be like, no, my sister would have seen it, but yeah, I did see it.
The only reason I bring it up is I thought it was so interesting that it was so region specific. I don't remember Pixar movies. Maybe there are a couple that take place in San Francisco.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like Toronto.
It's Toronto. And I love Toronto. So like I was just like, oh, right. And I thought it was really fascinating by putting it in a real place that at least I've been to. Like I understand. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I get it, right? Like I know what that is, and so I know what Toronto. I know what that train is. Like I've been on that. Like I've been in that neighborhood. So I was really fascinated that it's also set in I think 2013. So no pun intended. It's like a period piece. Like which is weird that it goes like. Because they have like they're exchanging CDs of their favorite boy band, right? Like
yes,
and I'm just like that's hilarious to me that they decided to do this. Like they needed it in a time when you could do this, where you could exchange CDs,
right. Yeah.
And so I really like that movie very, very much. But again, the fact that it was in Toronto specifically at this specific time, I just thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's true because the Asian community, like we have family up there, mm-hmm. of course, and it's just like when we would go over time, like over the years, we're like, wow, it's like Hong Kong number 2.
Yes,
very, very, very Asian. I'm like, you guys have a uptown and downtown Chinatown. That's no joke. Like it's next level. There's a lot of Chinese. I mean, when there's like regular malls that have Chinese writing on it, it's like a double take. So it's really weird, of course, coming from somewhere like Orlando. But Boston, of course, like there's a Chinatown and there's a lot more culture there, but like, and it's, it's sort of changing here, but yeah, Toronto is, you're right though. I don't know if I recall like Pixar being so specific. It's usually just a place. Right? It's not really important where it is, but yeah, that's really funny. Especially because you've been, right? You're like, yep, I see that.
It's just like, oh yeah, I get it. So anyway, I was just curious to see that.
All right. Well, I don't want to take up all of your time, although I could just kind of sit here and chat with you all day. I'm really enjoying this. But, just in terms of wrap up, like what other hobbies and things do you love to do other than draw? Because I mean, that's sort of like work. But when I asked Stan Sakai, he was kind of like, I like to draw.
Which is very sweet.
Like, of course.
I love that because I have to say, as I've gotten older, I draw less when I'm not working. And I tell my students a lot to be careful because, and I might be unique in this, but when your hobby becomes your work, right? The thing that you love becomes your source of income. I think for me, it affected the way I think about drawing. So I don't doodle the way I used to, although I've been playing on my iPad more and drawing like dinosaurs and silly things, or just, I've been more playful. Excuse me. But so when it comes to, sorry, it's just thinking about like what happens when the thing that you love becomes your job. Anyway. So it's so fun that you talk about hobbies because I feel like I'm in my midlife crisis thing where suddenly my hobbies are like, I'm in the middle of the process of buying like a little condo. And I've never been a homeowner before, and I'm very excited about it. But like my hobby right now is figuring out like what the plantings are going to look like on the patio, right? Like my hobbies have gotten very small. So I used to live for travel. I think one of the beautiful and really extraordinary luxuries of my job is that I've been to 5 different continents because of comics, right? Because I was a guest at the convention. So I've been all over the world. And for me, like that was life affirming to get out of, I mean, I live in New York City, which is pretty great, but to go somewhere else and be reminded that there are cities and lives and people and some of which might be the same, some of which will be different, but like that there's a world out there, for me was always just this really extraordinary thing. And no matter where I went, I would meet people who would change my life in some way. I've made lifelong friends, or I would have a conversation or an experience with someone. And that I still think about 20 years later or 10 years later. So travel was a big thing for me. COVID, of course, stopped that. And it's strange. I have less of a bug to do that than I used to. I've become a little more of a homebody. I think, again, part of that's just a little bit of age. My other things for hobbies. So I started working out really heavily a couple of years ago. I do find the gym is like my happy.
I can see.
It's my happy place. Thank you. Thank you. I don't have a sense of it. Other people do. It's also really weird when people, as I'm sure we all know, we see ourselves so differently than I think other people see us, which always fascinates me. On a sort of funnier, lighter note, like I became many years ago obsessed with true crime. So I think it was that TV show Forensic Files. So if I have like a hobby, right, I'm kind of obsessed with true crime, like anything, and documentaries, anything that comes up where there's some sort of mystery or some sort of criminal thing that happened. I don't know. I'm always fascinated by that stuff. I tend to read more nonfiction than fiction. So like I was just looking, I have a couple books about the next wave of extinction and the science of evil and stuff like the Jaws log, right? Which is all about the making of the movie, like just weird and random stuff. I find that I'm really interested in weird and random things. The other thing that happened during the pandemic is I started cooking, like I think a lot of people, and I'm actually a really good cook. So, and I think part of that comes from my astrological sign. I'm a Cancer. And so we are homebodies who like to feed people. And that, like, if you look on my chart, I'm exactly that. Like, I don't cook for myself, but nothing brings me pleasure like making food, a dinner for a group of friends. I find I just thrive on that.
Oh, well, I love that.
Done.
I'll bring some Jamaican food. I'll contribute.
I don't know if I cook Jamaican. You'll have to teach me. But listen, like, I've gotten very basic in my old age. Like, I find,
you've said your old age so many times throughout this podcast. I'm kind of going to throw it at you. You're not that old, first of all.
Okay, well, thank you.
You definitely don't look old, and so it's it's a spirit thing. But yeah, you keep saying this. Oh, as I've gotten in my old age, and I think it's because on the internet there's all these pictures of you of like 25, and I feel the same way. I'm like, why is this? This is not who I am. And so it makes you feel old because you're always referenced to these old things, like I'm always going to get the Mulan thing. And I was like 16 when I started.
Is that true?
So,
you were 16?
When it started, because it was like a 4 or 5 year process. Yeah, it was a long process.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was a long process.
So sorry.
I was in high school. So yeah.
You're 16, you get this gig. Are you like, are you like very typical high school? Like, oh, it's just this thing I do after school? Or were like, did you understand like the magnitude of it?
I don't think I understood the magnitude of that 20 years later, people would still be so excited about it because it's Disney Princess, right? Like, I don't think that was there, but I was really excited about the opportunity and who I was working with, and really grateful for that. And I was not a typical high schooler anyway, because I was just kind of dying to be done with school in general, so I could go on to the real life that was waiting for me, which I had so many responsibilities. I was already teaching. I was already, like entrenched in what I did. So I mean, it was a little different, but I mean, I was typical high schoolers in some way, right? But for sure, I don't think I realized how long lasting the impact of working on something like that was, and how great it would be, right? Like the character in general, like what that would have meant to me personally, like to have worked on that one. Like I could have been working on like Monsters Inc. Right? Or something that would be like great, like fun movie, nothing, but like the fact that Mulan's like the first female heroine character that didn't get saved by a man, like there's just so much there, right? And like now fast forward to all the activism that I'm doing and everything, and just being rooted in this, connected to this character, I definitely didn't foresee any of that.
I remember talking to, so this is me fanning a little bit, but talking to Jeanette Kahn, the then publisher of DC Comics, about Mulan, because I was obsessed and remain obsessed with that movie, mostly for what it does, and what it does, but particularly its take on. So one of the things I had really long conversation. I'm sorry, I'm extending this, but I had really interesting conversations about with Kelly Sue, and we may or may not have differed, but I did a long academic paper on Wonder Woman, and one of the thesis question right before I started Historia, and the thesis questions was, is war a feminist ideal? Is it a feminist idea? Mm-hmm. And so I talked to NYU people and read all these stories, and so they're very interesting, conflicting ideas. But I remain really fascinated by the conflation of gender and sex and war in our culture, in all culture, I think. And so that movie just hit all the sweet spots for me. And so it's meant a lot to me even to this day, because I think about that conversation with Jeanette Kahn, publisher of DC Comics, and the conversation that we had about that movie and sort of its import, and particularly as it relates to characters like Wonder Woman. So take that for what it's worth.
Well, lovely. No, so anything that our listeners need to know about upcoming work, other than, everybody who hasn't read Historia yet should, and obviously all of the X-Men stuff, but you have new stuff coming out, and so I'll link that, but anything you want to share? Thank
you. So Historia is a big thing. The next big project is through Zest World. You can find them on Instagram and Twitter. It's a new comics platform. I kind of describe it as a mix between Webtoon and Substack, subscription comics. This is where my Other Worlds project is going to be. So the stuff that I was talking about, particularly the super personal stuff, we're going to be launching that in the next probably 8 weeks or so, very, very soon. Amanda Connor is there, Jimmy Palmiotti, Alex Segura, the author, Pete Tomasi. There's a bunch of other people that are launching the site, and it's really lovely. The interesting thing is it's scroll comics. I don't know if you've ever read those. It's a different way of reading comics. I hope people will get into it. But yeah, that's my next big project.
Exciting. And I'm, like I said, sign me up. We're all in. It sounds really exciting. And just love your work. Such an honor to talk to you today and get to know you. And this was a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll come back.
I would love that. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, Phil Jimenez, everybody.
Bye.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.